It's the question that drives us. It's the question that brought you here. So plug in, free your mind. Welcome to Echoes of Eternity.
Plot twists are what define stories and great legends. I came across her blog, The Blue-Eyed Mutant, on which our guest would write about her own life experiences, highlighting a powerful array of topics. Being an avid reader, it would not surprise me if she's dedicated an entire room in her house to books. In October 2022, she gifted us with her debut novel, Sisters of the Circus, a tale of the power of sisterhood and womanhood, trust and self-worth, flying and falling and getting up no matter what. With so much to discuss on today's show, I present to you author, English teacher, and travel enthusiast Laila Manack. Laila, welcome to the show.
Hi Shamil, how are you?
I'm great, thanks. Thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's my first podcast. It's very cool.
Okay, that's awesome. I'm glad I get to be the first one then.
Yeah, no, it's very trendy now. I think you're like ahead of the times, you know?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. Thank you so much for that. I hate to ask you this, and I'm sure you get asked this question all the time.
Let's have it.
What are you reading at the moment?
Oh my gosh. What am I reading? It's called Alone with You in the Ether by Olivia Blake. She also wrote the Atlas 6 series, which is a fantasy series. But I think this one was her first novel, which didn't do too well. And then she got popular with her fantasy series. So this one then got sold out. So this is, it's sort of like a niche love story. Set amongst the cosmos. I'm not that far in yet, so we'll see how it goes.
Okay, so no spoilers.
No, nothing there yet. I wouldn't even be able to give them to you.
No, that's awesome. Like when I thought of the question, because I know you're writing something at the moment as well, and I'm like,
yes,
I wonder if she has time to read.
I have to make the time to read, especially now because you're always on TikTok and there's always, something that's pulling your attention.
Yes.
So you have to make the time because otherwise I'm not going to get any reading done.
No, that's true. No, awesome. Many people might not know this. Any of the viewers that are seeing you for the first time or they're hearing about you for the first time might not know that you were born with a syndrome that inhibits your hearing in one ear and you lack sense of smell, right?
Yes, I can't smell.
What was that like growing up for you?
It was strange because I grew up with a family who they always complained about smells, and I felt like it was a better thing for me not to be able to smell because my dad would always be like, something's stinking, like there's always something, and I would just be like, well, I think maybe it's an advantage not to be. And I also loved animals, and when I would work at the animal shelters, I would come back and I did not know that I had a stench on me, and my mom would be like, please go and take a shower.
So pros and cons.
Pros and cons, definitely. I think as I got older, I was like, it would be nice to know, what I smell like and what other people and like other things. But yeah, my sister helps me out with like smells because I have to ask someone that I trust, and I'm like, I'm going for this vibe. Can you pick out a perfume that can maybe give me this is the essence that I'm going for.
But that makes it so interesting, right? Because you've got to describe what you want to go for.
Exactly. And then also when I'm writing, it's different, right? Because you have to describe scents that I've never, I don't know what a smell is, I don't know what that is. So I have to sort of go off of what other authors describe smells as. Yeah.
Interesting. And now obviously this isn't something, someone can just see by looking at you and knowing, like when you were younger and stuff, what is that emotional journey like when people did find out? I don't know if they ever did when you spoke about it, especially like during school and, just growing up. Did you ever feel like you were treated differently?
Not necessarily. I think because, like you said, it's like an unseen disability, so it really goes under the radar, and then it's one of those things where I don't really get I'm like privileged enough not to get a stigma from it. I think the hearing thing may be a little bit different because I do feel that I get, overstimulated, and there's a lot of, there are some complications that come with not being able to hear on one side. I'd get lost a lot as a kid because I couldn't hear where my parents were calling me from. So you have both ears to point out direction, and because I only have one, I'm like, what's going on? But and then there's a couple other things, but otherwise not necessarily from others, just just little things.
Okay, so then if I understand correctly, so you weren't really like bullied, and you didn't have to go through any of that, right?
Luckily.
But again, I think whether you had to go through it or not, we speak about this journey of self-love.
Yes.
Right? And having this syndrome, what was did you ever feel like you had to, go through certain steps to accept it and then, love yourself for who you are? Because obviously you're different, right? You're very unique.
Yes.
And your experiences are unique because of it.
Yeah. As I got older, I think I started to embrace those more because I think we come from our parents' generation who raised us. They were sort of like, don't label things and don't put labels on things because it makes you different, or it makes you you're like, you're not disabled, you're fine. Like, and I'm like, it's not a bad thing to be a label. It's not a bad thing to label yourself necessarily, if that's what the reality is. And you sort of saying that being disabled is a bad thing is that is a bad thing in itself.
Yes.
So I think taking away that stigma and being like, well, this is the reality and it's fine. I think that came when I was older, and you can start to pick and choose what values you want to take with you into adulthood. I think that was, that's a journey that we all can go on.
100%. I mean, like you mentioned, labels. And whether we like it or not,
Yes.
right? It's out there. We get labeled. We even label ourselves sometimes. But I love that you said, at the end of the day, you do reach a stage where you get to decide what values you want to attach to that.
Yeah.
And carry that forward.
Exactly. Especially, coming from an older generation where they felt like, don't like force other people's ideas onto you. And sometimes those things are not there to hurt you, and they're not they're sometimes it's a good thing to want to define yourself differently.
100%, and that's something we're definitely going to chat about, maybe before we even get there. So I think when we had the chat offline, I can't remember, but I mentioned the word Culturescape. I can't remember, but I'm mentioning it now.
Yes. So
Culturescape is actually it's a term that was coined by Vishen Lakiani. So he's the founder of Mind Valley. And what it means is that, it's the rules that we live by within our cultures and communities that, kind of rule us, but don't really serve us in this day and age.
Yes.
Right. And I want to build on this concept going forward, but before we get there, now you're an author.
Yes.
And one of the examples of Culturescape is selecting or having to select a pre-approved career.
Yes.
Okay, so now as an author, you've chosen something that's quite unconventional, or seen as unconventional, especially in the the culture and the communities we come from. How did you actually decide I want to be an author? And just maybe tell us about that.
I think it was I was very lucky to grow up in a family that didn't really enforce in that area. They didn't enforce their opinions on me. In other areas, we'll talk about that. But
sure, please.
But yeah, in those areas, I was very lucky to have been very, very free and very liberal with what I wanted to go into, and when it came to career paths and ambitions, it was very much my choice on what I wanted to do. And I was always a reader, and I always grew up around all of these books, and then I was very lucky to be a teenager in the age where a lot of these books were being turned into movies, so that was even more of a like a motivator. And then it's very unfortunate that just the arts are not as appreciated as they should be, and I think that's what demotivates a lot of people. And even me now, like I can't be an author on my own. Like I can't just be I'm not a full-time writer, like I'm still teaching, because you have to keep the lights on. That's unfortunately what a lot of artists have to deal with, is we have to be able to juggle real life responsibilities and other work alongside the work that we want to create.
Exactly. So I think that's quite interesting, and thanks for sharing that. I think you touched on something so important though. So one is, obviously there's maybe not enough appreciation for the arts and those professions, and also this idea though that it's okay, and I think I spoke about this on a previous episode, but it's okay to have multiple interests.
Yes.
Right? And even professions, you don't need to pick a single sort of career, and that's it until you retire almost.
It's very difficult to be able to pick something to do when you're 18 and then run with that for the rest of your life. I fully believe that that's just a nonsense concept. It's so difficult to know what you want to be for the rest of your life, and you should be able to pivot at any time, and you're not necessarily throwing anything away. That's all just part of your life experience. If you went through 3 years of accounting and you decide now I want to be a vet, that's you have 3 years of accounting as experience. You're not throwing anything away. That doesn't go to waste,
I agree, and I think some would say those that know me quite closely would say I'm a living example of that. Because, so even though in corporate I had multiple roles there, but people would I could feel them, even if they didn't confront me with it, but I could feel that they were judging. You're doing this, now you want to switch to this, now you want to switch to this. But I really believe that in life you don't ever have to feel stuck.
No.
Right? And it's a journey. I mean, if I had to stick with my first job that I got forever, I don't know, I think I would have went mad.
It's crazy, especially because when you're so young, you feel like you have all of these years ahead of you, and then there's people telling you that no, you need to stick with this for another 30, 40, 50 years, and you're like, that's crazy, I can't do this for another 40 years. You should always go with your gut,
Exactly.
You should always choose yourself.
And there's so much outside noise as well, especially when it comes to that time in your life when you have to pick a profession. And we attach so many, let's use labels, like you said, to certain professions, and the status, reliability, money, whatever it is.
Especially in our community.
And if you, select something that doesn't fit any of those, you almost lose value to some extent.
You lose that inherent value that people place on those professions. Things like, being a doctor and being an engineer or an accountant. There's certain things that a lot of families want you to pursue, but it's very difficult, listening to your kids, but we also have a responsibility to choose ourselves, because at the end of the day you're going to be the one who's turning 75, and now you've pursued accounting for the last, I'm not bashing any accountants, but this is just an example. You're going to be the one who wakes up when you're 75, and then you didn't pursue your dreams, and now you can't blame your parents for that, because that was your choice.
Agreed. Maybe let's unpack that, and we can speak a bit about individuality. From a personal perspective, because again, you've picked something that was unconventional. Yes, you're fortunate that you were allowed to pursue that dream of yours. How does someone actually begin that journey of understanding themselves and almost pursuing individuality?
Sure, that's a tough one. I think a lot of it comes from the environment that you grew up in, and how you were raised, and what you were taught was okay and not okay. And I think sometimes it just comes from watching other people pursue their dreams and reach their goals, and then you decide that's what I want too. Like I want to be there.
Yeah, I think it's so important to find the right inspiration. I think a mistake people, or let's call it a trap that people might fall into when trying to find themselves, is, now I've lost my train of thought.
No, that's okay.
It will come back to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the trap that they fall into is either, they get caught up in the outside noise.
Yeah.
It's, they forget that it's quite important to take the people, that might not understand the dreams that you want to pursue, to take them along with you on the journey, as opposed to isolating yourself and thinking, that they might not understand, so let me not pursue it. It might be better to pursue it, but take them with you.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And sometimes leave people behind.
Exactly.
Don't be afraid to just go on the journey alone. Sometimes people don't want to come with you, and that's okay.
Exactly. And it takes so much strength, right? I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but it must have taken lots of strength. I mean, we all go through certain things in our life that you have to leave certain people behind.
And that's really tough, especially, and I'm going to say especially for like young women, where you have so many expectations on you from every which way. And I think because of the weight of that pressure, and because of how normalized it is, it feels like nobody's ever done this and nobody can do this, and this is just the way things are, and this is how I have to do this. And this goes for any area of your life.
Yes.
This can be career, this can be like relationships, this can be whatever it is, but you really have to like push through. That's like, you have to choose yourself, because nobody else is going to be there at the end of your life and looking back on your own memories and being like, well, maybe I should have done this. That's going to be you. Nobody else is going to have to live with your decisions. Everybody else who's making choices for you has ulterior motives, whether you like that or not, whether you accept it or not. Nobody else is making those decisions for you and for you what you want.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant, because it's something that we all struggle with. And like, I think women, men, I think we all struggle with it, is listening to our own voice, versus listening to the voice of others.
There's so much outside noise, right?
Yes.
Yeah, there's so much, and it's coming from everywhere.
Exactly. And I think, again, it depends a lot on your environment and your community and stuff, but how much value you place on your own voice versus the external voice, and how much that actually influences your decisions.
Yes. And I think from when you come from a community like ours, and I think a lot of people do, even though you might not be from our community, a lot of them are very similar, where you value those opinions a lot, and you place so much gravity on what other people think and what other people have to say. And even if it's not other people, even if they're coming from like your grandparents or your aunties, or those are your decisions. Like, people always feel over invested in your life and your life choices, and it's okay to draw those boundaries, because those are your choices.
Yeah. So I mean, I like that you mentioned the word boundaries as well, because that's something, and maybe before we get into it and unpack it a bit, but let's just highlight, right? So when we speak of communities, I think it's so easy to forget that a community can be the people that you spend most of your time with as well. It doesn't have to be your cultural background, right? And now going back to just boundaries and setting those, how do you think you start having the right conversations, especially in like the communities we come from and those backgrounds, because they can be difficult, right? To set those boundaries, and even voicing your individuality can be quite difficult, because you're vulnerable in that state. It takes a lot of strength and courage. How do you think we should go about, just maybe starting the right conversations,
opening those
conversations, as opposed to shying away from it because we're afraid of the outcome before we even have the conversation.
Oh my gosh, that's a tough one. I think knowing where you're coming from, first of all, knowing what your perspective is and what you're not willing to budge on, because that's going to tell you whether you respect yourself enough to walk away at the end of the day. And this sounds very like pessimistic, but obviously I don't know if you can tell that I'm talking from personal experience, but yeah, you do have to know what you're willing to protect of yours, right? Okay. And I think opening those conversations, sometimes they can go really well, and you can meet people who understand you, and you can have those discussions with, whether it's elders or grandparents or even friends. You can have those discussions, and people will be willing to meet you where you are and willing to grow with you, and also willing to see you, for what your truth is. But sometimes they won't be willing to do that with you, and I think you have to decide what that relationship is worth to you. You have to decide, am I willing to put this effort in to continue this relationship, even though it's going to cost me something? And sometimes the cost is worth it, and sometimes you can maintain that relationship. But other times, you have to put yourself first, and the distance is going to be worth more than what you would have lost.
I think that's powerful, and again, it speaks so much to like even just change and how some people are so reluctant.
Yes.
They're not really open to change.
Yeah.
And something I found as well that sometimes works, and I think when you make the decision to voice your truth and to live your truth, it's quite difficult, but the minute you start living it, you're kind of showing people something new, something that you might not be able to explain in words.
Yes.
And then they might be like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Now this makes sense.
Yeah.
And I can understand it better.
Yeah. And I have to say that you also shouldn't be waiting for them to realize that.
Wow. Yeah, that's so true. Like, yeah, I didn't think about that. You also
can't, if you decide that this is my truth and this is what I want to live, you can't be waiting for, some sort of external validation, and because the truth is, you might take that direction and you might make mistakes and you might fumble and you might stumble, and then you're going to be like, oh my God, there's people looking at me, and then they said that I'm going to do this. Yes. And so you need to know that that's the direction that you chose, and you need to be in there 100% and not give a damn about what people are going to think about where you are and where you're going. Even if you're successful, which obviously everybody wants to get there in their area of whatever they decide. But you can't be waiting for external validation and waiting for those people who didn't understand to understand, because they might not. That's sometimes, yes. you have to get there on your own, and you're going to be there at the top of the mountain, and you'll be there by yourself, and that's enough. Like, that's completely fine.
Yeah, I mean, that's like incredible, and I hope, like, I'm taking mental notes for myself as well, because as much as sometimes we know about this stuff, we can easily forget it.
Yes.
And you mentioned the word success, but I think we don't spend enough time asking ourselves, what is the benchmark for success defined by me? Yes,
right? Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's how you get caught up in the external validation.
Especially because, like a lot of those benchmarks that we make for ourselves, they are based on external validation. And I think it's healthy, and it's important for us to build goals for ourselves that are not based on that. A couple of years ago, when I started doing like a New Year's goal list, and I don't remember who the person was who sort of like encouraged me to do that or taught me to do that. I'm not sure if it was like a YouTube video or something, but they were like, don't don't put things on there that you want other people to give you, or that's out of your control. Because, you know, you can, I can say that I want to, for example, I want to get a publisher this year, or I want to get an agent this year, or whatever it is, right? That's not in my control. I can't control that. What I can control is, am I going to write how many words? How many books am I going to write this year? How much, you know? So put things on there that you feel like you can achieve on your own, not I'm going to get this promotion, or I'm going to, you know?
Yeah.
Things like that.
So I get that. So what you're saying is, you know, set goals, like one it's for yourself, it's not really for others, and then it's about what you have in your control.
Yeah, what you can achieve on your own, not necessarily stuff that people can give you, because that's not something that you can control at all. You can't control when your boss decides to wake up and give you a raise, right? You can't decide like when an agent is going to come and into your inbox and offer you representation, or, you know, so put to work what you can control. This is not like a bootstrap sort of, you know, pull yourself up, and this is not that. That's not what this is. What I am saying is just try not to focus too much on what other people can give you.
You mentioned something as well, like earlier on, and something we do want to chat about is, and you used to write a lot about it. I'm not sure if you still do it. Was intersectional feminism.
Yes.
That sounds like a mouthful. Okay. I think as a starting point, let's maybe define that. You know, what does it mean to you? Because, you know, some people might be hearing this for the first time.
Okay.
And, you know, so let's maybe unpack that. And what does it actually mean? What does intersectional feminism mean?
Oh my gosh. Okay. We're going to school.
Yes.
Okay. So
school us.
Yeah. So I think my first introduction to intersectional feminism, my gosh, I don't even remember. I think I was in varsity, and we were doing like media studies class, but I think a lot of women have been introduced to the first wave of feminism, which was like white feminism, which is essentially, you know, women and men have not been equal under the patriarchy, and we want women's rights. Okay. And then you start to pick up that not all women are actually equal, and not all women's rights were fought for equally, especially through the women's rights movement and through suffragette movements. And, you know, Black women were a lot of the times not fought for, and white women got rights before women of color and before Black women. So what intersectional feminism seeks to do is look at the intersections of everybody's identity, and look at where all of those things meet, and what those intersections of your identity actually makes up, and what advantages and disadvantages those give you as you're moving through the world. So, for example, as, you know, an Indian, maybe upper middle class woman who grew up in South Africa, my life would be very different to a, let's say, white American woman who grew up in an upper class suburbia, and, you know, so those things will be very different for each woman. And it's very important to look at, there's so many different areas that you can inspect when you're looking at those things. But it's just to say that we need to be wary and conscious of our privileges and our advantages and disadvantages based on where we're from, what background we're from, you know, socioeconomics, race, culture, gender, all of that.
Okay, yes. I mean, so now it also makes so much more sense to me. I mean, you can only do so much, like, you know, Googling.
Yes.
And I think it comes back to the point we were chatting to about a little bit earlier, and like this individuality concept, and that no two people, you know, are going to be alike.
Exactly.
So just, you know, so for you, because I know you're quite passionate about it and trying to, you know, bring more light to the subject, you know, where does that drive stem from?
I think a lot of it came from just wanting to write what I want to read. So I was like, I really want to read this book, so I'm going to write it, because, you know, the book that I want to read is not out there. And then sometimes it's just wanting to tell a specific story. You just have a story in your head that you have to get out, and it has to come out somehow. And then other times with the book that I'm writing currently, it comes from wanting to start more conversations. Especially I think my current one is centered around gender-based violence.
Okay.
And I'm just hoping to start or to continue conversations that are already being had.
That's amazing. I mean, I commend you for doing something like that. And, we don't have to chat too much about the book that you're busy writing, but is it going to be something along the lines of like the Sisters of the Circus, where, it's told like a story, but if you sort of read for deeper meaning, which I love to do, take any book and try to read for deeper meaning. Is it going to be something like that in order to start these conversations?
Yes. So it's I'm hoping that readers are very smart. Like we writers we always try not to underestimate our readership, because they're so clever, and there's this broader conversation going around. I'm going off on a tangent now, but it's around critical thinking and like reading for subtext. And a lot of our media now is just being criticized for simply having something in it that somebody might not like, even though the writer, just by writing that scene, doesn't like endorse that thing. It just exists in a story, and it's part of a broader part of a broader subject, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we agree with what the character is doing. But there's just there's more of a push now from specific readerships, where people don't necessarily read for subtext, and you're not reading or you're not looking at things in the broader concept, or so it's a bit complicated, because I look at those things and I'm like, should I be making things more obvious, and like should I be like spelling things out for people? And then I'm like, no, like
I can imagine it's tricky.
And then I'm like, no, people will, whoever will understand it will find it, and they'll appreciate it for what it is. I'm not going to try to spell things out for people. I think I'm not trying to like infantilize my readership and like spell things out in ABCs just for people to, if you did want to read a university textbook, then you'd find a university textbook. That's not what the story is for.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it must be so tricky, and again, I think
it's tricky.
It speaks so much to the power of the pen, though, right? And this is maybe something that it doesn't actually only apply to authors. I mean, like just thinking about it as you're talking, but these days there's so much content out there. Like in the written form, whether it's on like social media or whatever. And the power of the pen is so difficult to manage. It's a responsibility.
It is.
And even like you're saying, if you want to write about these like certain subjects and bring it to the front and to people's attention, but you run the risk of them not even knowing that, because you haven't spelled it out for them. So I can just imagine it's quite difficult. I can't see myself doing it.
It is very difficult, because you have to know your target audience very well, and you have to be on top of things, and the way that young people are thinking nowadays, and how they're reading things. And I think there is still a readership for what I'm writing towards. So I think I'll just keep doing what I'm doing, and hopefully it goes well. I think it's difficult for creators in the current like social climate.
Yeah, especially, I mean, depending on what you write about and stuff,
Yes.
you probably have to be a very strong person as well.
Yes, there's a lot of explaining that you have to do, you know, when you have to, like, I see a lot of directors and movie writers coming on and being like, this is not what I meant when I wrote this, and, you know, it's about this, and these are the themes. And whereas before there wasn't such a conversation on like the surface level, what the movie is actually showing, but the broader message. And I think we should try to move back to that.
Yes, yeah. So I mean, I think we've just gone a little bit off track.
Yes, we have. Sorry,
no,
that was me.
This is great. Like, I love it, right? But if we come back to intersectional feminism, you know, in your opinion, because I think while we have this platform, we could probably voice our opinions on it. But how do you think, or what role rather, do you think women can play in empowering each other, so themselves and each other, and you know, what role do or should men play in that journey?
That's a very good question. Okay, so the women, I think it's very difficult for women to embrace like the full range of choice, and the same goes for me, you know. But I think just what I would say is acknowledging that sometimes our choices might not necessarily be our own, and that's through no fault of our own. That's what being part of a system entails, you know. And just always be thinking deeper, you know. Always be looking out for any way that you could be doing something that you might not necessarily want to do or be comfortable with doing. Look out for yourself and for other women always. Yeah, just I think critical thinking is always my go-to. But yeah, like embrace the full range of your choices and of other women's choices, and acknowledge that we live in a system where we're always looking to be exploited. So acknowledge that you always have choice, and you always have the power to say no. And to men, I would say listen.
Yes.
You know,
100%.
Yeah, I would say listen, and also acknowledge that the world was built for you, and there are so many accommodations that women have to make to live in a world that was built for men in all areas of our lives. The other day I got into the car and my boyfriend's brother was like, "What are you doing?" So I was cranking the side, you know, there's levers on the sides. Yes. I was cranking both of them. So the first one is to make me sit higher because I literally can't see over the steering wheel. And then the other one was to push the back seat forward. And then the one underneath the seat was to push it forward. And he was like, "What are you?" I was like, "I can't, this car wasn't made for me. I can't drive it otherwise. I literally wouldn't be able to see over the steering wheel." It's tiny things like that where you realize like this world literally wasn't built for us. And that's not to say that, you know, like I hate being here and all of those things. I'm not trying to like play the victim at all. What I am saying is to men, there are so many little things that you might not realize and you take for granted. You walk into like if you've ever been house hunting, or like you walk into the kitchen and you open the cupboard and you take something out. I have to climb the cupboard to get up there. There's so many things. And if that had been designed by a woman, I can guarantee you that, you know, that we would not have to climb anything. Just acknowledge the privilege that you have. And as superficial as those examples might be, what I am trying to get at is in like a world that is built for you, there's so many little accommodations that we have to make, and that compromises so much of us. It compromises, you know, it could be emotional labor, it could be physical labor, it could even be like safety, like medical safety. You know, if a car is built for a man, what happens in an accident? It was only accident tested for men. So more women get into accidents. There's so many medical advancements that were only tested on men. We recently only got into researching, you know, new forms of birth control for men, because birth control was only researched for and tested for women, you know. So there's so many things, but yeah, I would just say acknowledge the privilege and listen to the women around you and see them separate to what they can give you and what they can offer you and what they are to you. See them as, you know, individuals independent of you.
No, I think that's great. I think you've given us so much on that. Hopefully people will, you know, go back and re-listen to just, even if it's just this little segment. I think that it's so powerful and it's so important. And I don't want to take away from anything you've said, but if I had to, let's say, not summarize it, but, you know, let's say re-echo like 3 points. It's like from a man's perspective, at least. It's like acknowledging a woman's presence.
Yes.
Recognizing and respecting, you know, her voice.
Yes.
And I think if I had to just give like a third point, it would be lead by example.
Yeah.
If you can do the first two and sort of lead by example, you know, you can show other men that it's okay to
yes,
acknowledge.
because
you know.
oftentimes, like, men don't realize the kind of power that they have in those conversations. You know, you have more privilege, or you have more range with your friends than we do. You know, you have more range with other men than we do. Other men listen to other men. So they call out your friends. That's another important thing, you know. Don't be afraid to say something, because you might feel a little bit unsettled, but can you imagine like how disrespected and dehumanized the woman would feel if she was in the room, you know? So that it does speak to your conviction and how much of a man you are to be able to call people out when you disagree with something.
So it speaks to that critical thinking, right? This awareness.
Yes.
That we should all have, actually. No, thank you so much for enlightening us, so taking us back and just reminding us about these points. So yeah, let's get into reflections. I've said it, I think, in almost all the episodes, but I have no idea what the guest brings on.
Yes.
Now, you've brought something that looks like a book, but I'm not sure. So yeah, let's describe it for those listening.
Okay, so this is a notebook that I got from the Seoul Museum when I was in Korea. So I lived there for almost 2 years. I was teaching English there, and it was the best experience of my life. But what I actually brought was inside here. It's a little drawing that I made.
Okay.
This was before I got published. So this is, I don't know if you can...
Do you want to hold it up to the camera?
To the camera?
Yeah,
okay,
just so
let's go.
Get a shot of that.
Okay. So this is me.
Yeah.
I drew a picture of me as an author, and it has...
I see. It says Laila.
It has a little... Okay. So I drew this before I knew that I was going to be published. I just had this image of me like on a stage doing some kind of book talk or book launch or something like that. You can see it's dated here. It's like, it says 25th of September 2020. Okay.
Wow. Okay.
And I was like, I have this image in my head, and I know that I'm going to be doing book talks as an author one day, and I know that this is going to come true, and it did. And I think that's very cool. For me to be able to, you know, have lived out this image that I drew in my head. And I think it's just the power of manifestation. I know I sound like a chakrahan, and, you know, like,
no, but like,
there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of power in visualizing things and putting things to paper. Even like a Pinterest board or like a vision board. I think there's a lot of power in visualizing where you want to be. And even if you want to go like the religious route or the faith route, that's prayer is the same thing. But yeah, I eventually did end up if I can show you like on my phone, I might be able to show you. There's like a picture that looks exactly like this from when I was at a literary fest, which is very cool. I think that, you know, I should be drawing all of my dreams from now on.
Yes, like I'm like honestly I'm blown away. I love these things.
Yeah,
like,
it's very cool because and I made sure to date it because I was like, I know this is gonna happen, and this is before, I think this was a couple months before I got the email that I was going to be published. So yeah, I like make sure to document what you want to happen because it's going to happen.
Like, I swear to you, like I'm amazed, like I'm blown away.
It's cool, right?
It's so cool. Like, and I love the drawing, by the way.
Thank you.
I have to ask one question though.
Yeah.
You know, the whole idea of this manifestation.
Yes.
So I have to ask you, and it's maybe also like selfishly for personal reasons.
Yeah.
How did you, so I mean, you drew this image of yourself and you had this vision and you were quite certain about it, right? Did doubt ever creep in, or how did you manage to keep that at bay? Because you dated that 2020, right? But your book was like released in 2022.
Yes.
And I'm sure there was like talks and stuff way before that. But how did you manage that conversation in your mind to say that, you know, this is going to be me?
It's so strange because I speak with my partner about this all the time, about how powerful your mind has to be, or your mind is. You really have to believe that it's going to happen. Like you have to fully know. Like you can. It's already there. It's already in your future. You're just getting there. Like you literally you can see yourself there where you want to be, and for you to already know that it's going to happen, everything else is like confetti, you know? So everything else is just, you're just filling in the blanks. And I think doubt is inevitable, especially when you're a creator, when you're an artist. It feels very isolating to be able to be creating and not really knowing where you're going with it, especially if you don't have if you haven't been published and you don't have like anyone reading your work at the moment, and you don't know if what you're writing is any good or what you're creating is going anywhere. But you have to know in yourself that that's going to happen. You already know like where you're going. Everything else is just you're like coloring in the lines, right? So the picture's already there. You know with 100% certainty that it's there, and in the middle you might get doubts, but you need to believe that it's going to happen. Like 100% you're going to be there.
Yeah, it's like kind of going forth with conviction.
Yes, absolutely.
And not wavering from that image. That
I think doubt is very natural. I think like that it happens to me too. Like it can be sometimes like, you know, deliberating, like or debilitating.
Yes.
Wrong word.
Yes.
But yeah, I think just know how much, you know, how much strength you have, because sometimes you can be so hard on yourself.
This is like incredible, Laila. Thank you so much for sharing this with us, because I know this is also something that can be quite personal sometimes.
Yeah, it's very cool.
I love it though. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Didn't see it coming. So.
No. No, I actually, we just brought it in and now it's open. Yeah.
Yeah, no, incredible. Thank you so much, and thank you for obviously sharing everything that you have with us.
Of course.
And I've really had a good conversation with you.
Yeah, no,
Hope
this
you
was so
enjoyed
much
it.
fun. It was. Thank you so much for having me, Shamil.
No, you're welcome.